Hey guys, Omni here. As 2020 finally comes to a close, it is that time for me to give you guys my top 10 favorite films of the year. And just to get this all done in one video, since we got Cobra Kai dropping later tonight, we got the Doctor Who holiday special going on tomorrow night. It's going to be a busy weekend trying to keep up with all this stuff. I'm also going to include my top 5 worst films, and why 5? And that's just because I did not get to see as many films as I did in 2019 to give a full top 10 list, because honestly, a lot of these movies, though not on the top 10 best list, I don't feel deserve to be on a worst list of all things. So we're just going to do a top 5 of that. Again, this is going to be based on my enjoyment of the films, maybe not necessarily the technical execution of these movies. It's just the ones that I enjoyed the most throughout the year. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive into, and why not? Let's start off with the worst films of the year. So at my number 5, the least worst was probably Scoob. And I think that's mostly because I had a lot of expectations going to that. I grew up with the classic cartoons, and they really ended up just making a superhero Marvel movie where it wasn't necessarily about Scooby and the gang, but more so about setting up this Hanna-Barbera universe. And it just kind of sidelined our characters. I think some of the best bits of that when they were when they were all hanging out and they were interacting and they were being the gang. The best bits were that opening segment where we actually focus on Mystery Inc. themselves. From there on out, it just loses me. The next one, number 4, is going to be The New Mutants. And I think despite everything that happened with this movie, it's kind of impressive to me that it didn't end up higher on this list. I enjoyed bits of it. It definitely didn't live up to any of the expectations, let alone the wait. And I kind of understand, having seen it, why they did kind of hesitate at releasing it for so long. They didn't do any of the reshoots they had planned and released it as is. It is very apparent. There's still bits of it I enjoyed, but it is still, it's hard to ignore how clunky and how much it doesn't flow. You know, it was all right. Number 3 is going to be Bloodshot, Vin Diesel's Bloodshot, the adaptation of the Valiant comic book. This movie was just dumb. Turn off your brain, dumb. Had some fun action in it. CGI was pretty terrible. Dialogue was just cringy as all hell. It did make me chuckle, but this was not this was the last movie I saw before theaters in my area locked down, and that was a disappointing factor to leave in. That was a bad taste that was left in my mouth throughout the remainder of the year. Number 2 is The Turning with Finn Wolfhard. I forget everybody else that's in this movie. This movie was just boring. The acting was mostly terrible. I think the lead actress was doing the best out of everybody, and the movie just made no sense, and it just abruptly ends. I know it's adapted on a short story, but I read the short story after the fact, and it is much easier to follow than whatever the hell that movie was trying to do. But it was by far not as bad as the number 1 worst movie in this list, and that is The Grudge. This movie was just a painful thing to sit through. The editing, the pacing, the scares, the performances, everything in this movie was so stale. The way it was structured was just offensive to my eyes. And I enjoyed the Grudge movies, the ones that came before, even when they kind of started getting off the rails. I don't know. I don't know what they thought with this one. I think easily, for me, that was the worst movie that I saw all year. And I was looking forward to checking it out and seeing what they did, especially since they were putting it in the continuity of the previous movies. But having done that, it makes the entire plot, the setup, not even make sense. And from there, you're just jumping all over the place between different times, different settings, different characters, and it doesn't flow. If you've seen these movies, I want to know what you guys thought of them. But that's all I've got to say about them. I don't want to make this a long video, so we're going to go right into my top 10 favorite movies of 2020. Starting off at the bottom of my list at number 10 is actually going to be Wonder Woman 1984. Despite all the hype, the stuff that this movie had to live up to, it definitely disappointed. But out of everything else I saw this year, I still quite enjoyed it more than the things that I did not put on this list. I think the heart was there. I think the chemistry between Gal Gadot and Chris Pine was there. Again, another father figure that Pedro Pascal gets to play within the same year. Really brought the energy into it. The plot, not so much. The structure, some of the things that are happening in the backgrounds that they really don't want you to think about, kind of take away from it. But at the end of the day, it just barely makes my top 10 list. Number 9 is actually The Hunt, which was an interesting satire. I think people got there was a lot of controversy surrounding this movie, but people didn't, I don't think they gave it the time of day, or maybe we're just in a time where satire just can't work anymore because people just get too upset if anybody takes a stab at any one thing they believe in. This movie did not take a stance against one group of people or another. It pokes fun at both sides of the political spectrum. And on top of that, it's a lot of fun. It is so funny at times, and the action in it is top notch. You know, our lead in this, also fantastic performance. I think Betty Gilpin was her name. Great in this movie. The fight scenes were awesome. And it had me cackling every now and then. My number 8 movie is actually Bill and Ted 3, Bill and Ted Face the Music. I thought this movie was just exactly what we needed in 2020. It warmed the soul. It felt good having watched it. Of course, Keanu Reeves kind of going back to this character that he really spent a lot of his career trying to get away from, because he was always, for a long time, known as the whoa dude guy from back in the Bill and Ted days, between that and then Point Break and so on. It took a long time for him to get away from that. And now I don't think he can get back to that, because he did kind of stud it up a little bit. But however, Alex Winters did a fantastic job. The energy in the movie, the nostalgia in the movie, and just the feel-good, warm-hearted message that comes at the end of the film was awesome. I liked seeing these characters back. I loved the first 2 films when I was growing up. It was really nice and warm to see these characters back on the, well, not the big screen. That was the intention, but I watched it on my computer. But that didn't sour the effect for me. I would have liked to see it on the large screen in the theater, but this is the world we live in right now. My number 7 is going to be Soul. Having just watched this over the past weekend, was a fantastic, equally joyous movie, though it does tackle some more serious and existential themes. I thought this movie was beautiful. It was well handled, well acted, well performed. The animation with Pixar, as always, was great. I think the only thing that kept this from being my favorite Pixar film of the year was just that the ending left a little bit more to be desired. It was still great. It was still awesome, and I loved it. Coming in at my number 6 was surprisingly Bad Boys 3, Bad Boys for Life. I thought this movie was just a charm to watch. Honestly, I didn't expect much out of it, but I think the new director did a fantastic job at not only emulating Michael Bay's style, but actually doing a much better job at telling a story with these characters and updating them and making us feel this connection with them again, coming into this story years later. A little bit of some weird twists in there, but this is a franchise that I loved when it originally came out. Bad Boys 1, Bad Boys 2, loved it to death, and this one was much better than it had any right to be. It was a lot of fun seeing those 2 characters, Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, coming back together and bringing these characters back to just uniting them once again on the big screen was just a joy to watch. Their chemistry was just on point, especially since Martin Lawrence came back out of retirement to do this film with Will Smith. I really enjoyed it. My number 5 is Sonic the Hedgehog. This movie, again, was better than it had any right to be, and I think it would not have succeeded whatsoever had they not reanimated that movie. Again, that sets a weird and dangerous precedent for film when a studio kind of bends the knee to the fandom. But I think this is one of those rare cases where they definitely needed to. If they had kept that original monstrosity, this movie would not been as wholesome, cute, adorable. I love Sonic to death. It's one of my favorite video games of all time. And I thought they did a fantastic job bringing it to life. James Marsden apparently just cannot get away from these animated creatures, but his charm and his genuine delivery when talking to this animated creature who is not there in front of him makes this whole thing believable. Jim Carrey being Jim Carrey and not necessarily an adaptation of Robotnik or Eggman himself, brought his own energy into the role, which could be a little tired for some people, but I found it highly enjoyable. I thought he was energetic. I thought he was just hilarious at every moment he was on screen, especially with him and his assistant. It did kind of hinge on a little cringy here and there, but then again, this is targeted towards kids, definitely. So I'm not going to fault it too much on that. I thought it was a really enjoyable story. I thought Sonic was well animated. I thought it fit the whole tone. And again, another movie that was a lot better than it had any right to be. I still don't like the trope that Hollywood does with any of these video game adaptations of them coming from another world or us going into another world, like in the new Monster Hunter. We just can't get away from that. Just give us a fantasy world where this stuff exists. We coexist with these creatures and just let it be. I think audiences these days, if we can handle multiverses, time travel, all this MCU stuff, I think it's easy to say that people are smart enough to like figure out and accept these worlds if you just present it like that. You don't have to dumb it down or create this like funnel to feed it to everybody. Like, we'll take it. We'll take it as it is. Anyway, sorry, that's a tangent that these things just kind of trigger in me. Number 4 was Onward, another Pixar movie. I enjoyed this one. Pixar had 2 films this year, and out of the 2, Onward honestly was the one that I enjoyed the most. The performances between Tom Holland and Chris Pratt really brought it to life. I like, again, this dynamic of these brothers that are dealing with the loss of their parent in completely different ways. Again, so relatable, so grounded. The world that they created in this this fantasy world where all these fantasy creatures like us developed technology, lost their ability to use magic and become reliant on it. Again, it's a little bit of a commentary on our society itself, but it was so much fun. It had a lot of heart. The animation was there as always, and the characters themselves were just so endearing and relatable. I loved it. And again, I play D&D, so all of the D&D spins that they used in this just hit home for me. Number 3 is Birds of Prey, and I know a lot of people didn't like this movie, and I think it gets more hate than it deserves, but I found it to be extremely enjoyable. Between Margot Robbie, Journey Smollett-Bell, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, everybody in this movie brought the heat. Ewan McGregor as Black Mask, even though it's probably not the Black Mask most people are aware of or familiar with, he does a great job with blending this fun, charismatic character who is also unhinged and just malicious as all hell. But he's having so much fun doing it. Of course, it's kind of derivative of kind of the way Deadpool was kind of presented, but it worked for me. Bringing in the John Wick stunt team to actually coordinate a lot of the fights and stunt work in this definitely elevated a lot of the action. The action was top notch. And I think everybody knocked it out of the park as far as performances go. I had a lot of fun with it, regardless of what other people think. That was my number 3. Number 2 is actually The Devil All the Time. I've heard some mixed feelings on this movie as well, but I think all the performances in this film were just beautiful, well constructed, well thought out, and I loved this Southern Gothic tone that they had with it, especially being from one of those areas that has been mentioned in the movie. It's I know mostly where some of it even takes place. It was a really interesting thing, and I think it's one of the few times, because I was always worried about seeing Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Am I going to break away from that and be able to see him as other characters? And this is the first time I've seen him in anything that wasn't MCU related, and he really pulled me into this character and made me believe in this character. And it really, I think, in my opinion, showed off Tom Holland's acting chops. This movie was dark, it was gritty, it was self-reflective, and it was a experience. I really liked it. I liked it a lot. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. But my number 1 movie for 2020 is The Invisible Man. This movie was borderline perfection. The pacing, the plot, the performances, the suspension of disbelief with the technology that goes into the movie. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but this movie brings the Invisible Man into the modern age in a way that they failed to do when they tried to kick off their dark universe. This movie kept its budget tight. Lee Winnell coming in to save the day, wrote a fantastic script, worked with Elizabeth Moss at developing this character, the storyline that deals with gaslighting, toxic relationships, abuse mentally and physically, and takes it and adds so many layers to this giant onion of a movie. And it just, all of it worked. Out of everything I saw this year, I feel like that was the one that was the most close to a perfect film. And I enjoyed every second of it. It made me tense. It made me uncomfortable. It made me happy. It made me sad. It hit every note that I expect out of a movie. And the performance in this blew me away. Honestly, I hope this movie doesn't get forgotten. If I don't know what the Oscars are looking like this year, how this is all going to even happen, what's happening with it. I haven't been paying attention to it, but this movie deserves some attention. That's my top 10. That's my number one pick. Guys, let me know yours down in the comments below. I would love to know what movies you all saw this year, which ones you thought were the worst, which ones you thought were the best. Give me your all's lists. Sound off the comments. We'll carry on the conversation after the video. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys in the new year. Take care, everybody.